for joining us today. We're very excited for this joint webinar between Forrester and Telerik. My name is Ruslan Mursazadeh. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager, and I have the honor of introducing today's speakers. To start the webinar, John Wargo from Forrester will be talking about some of the enterprise mobility trends. John Wargo is a principal analyst at Forrester focusing on application development and deployment and open source software. Later, Brandon Satram, the General Manager for Progress Developer Tools and Platforms, is going to be talking about some of the solutions Progress and Telerik provide for enterprises to accelerate their mobile development. And we're going to be leaving about 10 minutes at the end to answer some of your questions. So feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. We'll be happy to answer them at the end. With that being said, John, would you like to kick it off?
Absolutely. Thanks, Ruslan. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Ruslan, if you could go to the next slide, please. And the next one after that. And the next one after that. So the folks here at Telerik asked us to spend a little time talking about what we see in enterprise development. And I've got a couple stories here around how we see how things are going and what's happening in the space, and then how it relates to the enterprise developer. And the first one is that the Forrester spent a lot of time recently talking about the fact that we believe that we're living in the age of the customer. And basically what this means is that the customers, your customers, may have enough information that they're able to drive their relationship with you. So instead of them having to wait for you to decide what you offer them and so on, or how to deal with pricing issues and support issues and so on, customers and consumers have so much more information available to them that they're able to drive this, and they're able to kind of play vendors against each other and so on. So it's really kind of changed the world, and it's effectively changed the way organizations have to deliver capabilities and so on for both their customer base as well as their internal users. Next slide, please. So the idea is that this age of a customer drives specific activities at IT organizations, for example. So they're actively focused on transforming the customer experience, and that involves being more nimble, trying things out, experimenting, doing some cool things to try to engage with customers, and basically inventing new technology to help them more effectively engage with their end users. It's all involved around embracing the mobile mind shift. So we've written a book on this topic. It kind of describes how the way people are thinking about mobile is changing, and we need to embrace this to kind of deal with them. Organizations are finding that they're becoming digital businesses. I don't remember who said it, but I've heard several times recently that there's this whole concept of pretty much any business is a software business now, because we have to deliver mobile apps and mobile websites and different forms of engagement. And then lastly, the whole concept of big data and what it means to business. So before today, you could throw things out there, see what happens. You might be gathering some data about what's happening and analyzing it, but there's more and more cloud-based and server-based technologies for gathering large amount of data, doing analysis, and so on. And these organizations have a much better picture of what is going on with their customers, their employees, and so on, and that's driving activities as well. Ruslan, next slide, please. So basically what this means is that organizations have to respond to two different types of end users. So we have to deal with employees and customers. And so in Forrester's eyes, this is kind of split into two parts of an organization. One is the traditional information technology, which is specifically around employee engagement and managing systems of record. And then what we're calling business technology, which is all around customer engagement and systems of engagement. And so if you look at the target audience and you look at some of the target technologies, they're really different between these two parts of an organization. And the reason why I say that is because we're not necessarily saying that there need to be two different separate organizations with these names. Often it's the same people in both, but the difference is in how rapidly they respond to things, how they engage with their end users, and also part of it too is who pays for it, right? So information technology is keeping the lights on. Business technology is new and innovative things you're doing to engage people with under the effort to increase revenue. And they typically have different budgets and different focuses, and also different speeds at which they do business. Next slide, please. So when you look at the enterprise and what the enterprise is doing for mobile, our research shows us that there's some very specific things that you need to deliver for these people. The first one is a useful and productive mobile strategy. It's really pretty stunning that a lot of organizations still have not yet defined their mobile strategy. And you can have one, but the important part of it is that actually useful and productive? And by useful and productive, I mean, is it something that's understandable? Is it something that's implementable? And is it something that allows people to do the things they want to do with mobile, but do it in a productive way? Is it slowing them down, or is it speeding things up for them? Because hopefully you'll agree that one is better than the other. And then the big thing that I'm seeing in my research is that you have to have experienced mobile developers, but you also have to have experienced mobile designers, okay? And those mobile designers are heavily involved in the process because the fast-moving pace of mobile development requires that you're very careful and thoughtful about how you do things, and you need the designers to help you do that. And then there's this whole concept of delivery of mobile-friendly services. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty much adamantly opposed to sending XML across the wireless network. So JSON-based services and things like that, clearly make things easier for mobile developers. But ultimately, the idea is that you want to break out the back-end services that you have in such a way that the mobile devices only get the data that they need. Now, you can either modify the services so that only the data that's needed for mobile devices are exposed to that service, or you can have a single service that accommodates multiple channels and then use some sort of middleware platform to strip out the extraneous data and not send it across the wireless device to mobile, or across the wireless network to mobile devices. That's one way of looking at it. And the last piece of this is to embrace the mobile cultural change, because mobile requires a completely different approach for how you build applications. There are a totally the security requirements, and there's theoretically a completely different development process and delivery process that is really affecting large change within these organizations. Next slide, please. So this whole concept of mobile driving changes in the development process and technologies is outlined here in this slide. The idea is, and I'm assuming you know a fair amount of this, but I'm trying to tie this all together in a story. First of all, we're delivering applications in weeks, not months. So the yearly or quarterly releases of applications simply don't work in the mobile space. We're finding that a lot of organizations are simply trying things out, throwing them out there, seeing what happens with it. You might add some cool new feature, do a release in 2 or 3 weeks, see how people respond to it, and either roll it back or update with new capabilities for the next version. We're finding a lot more agile and less waterfall, but what's interesting is, the vendors and the market is all telling us that we're seeing a lot of agile everywhere, but there's still an awful lot of development organizations that have either not adopted agile or they've adopted it but it's still in transition. They're still figure out how to make it an effective tool for their development organization. But there's still a lot of waterfall out there. We're also seeing organizations shifting testing to the left. So basically getting developers more involved in defining and even executing tests. That's the quickest and easiest way to deliver on quality applications, is if the problems are found in testing as close to the developer and as quickly after development is complete. So getting development more involved in testing is something that we see pretty critical. We also see continuous integration and continuous delivery affecting organizations, the ability to do builds, do tests, and so on in an automated fashion is going to great lengths to allow them to deliver more effectively and efficiently and more quickly. And then the last piece of this is automated testing and device labs. There's still a lot of manual testing going on in the space. There's still a lot of fingers touching keyboard screens, right, as part of the test process. So we're seeing a lot of really cool automation tools in the testing space. And then we're also seeing a lot of device labs where instead of having to decide, where to invest your money on a specific subset of the available devices to accommodate the greatest part of your percentage of your audience, you instead have access to cloud-based or partner-based device labs, and you can dramatically expand the target audience for your automated tests. So these are all the things that we see that, well, it's not all of them, but these are a few of the things that we see that mobile is doing to development organizations. It's affecting them both on the enterprise side and on the consumer side. Next slide, please. So I mentioned embracing the mobile development culture, and the idea is that there are some cultural changes that happen along with those technological changes I talked about a little bit earlier. I mentioned this earlier, but designer involvement throughout. So instead of the designer being someone that gets involved at the beginning, before development starts on a particular set of features, we find them more and more involved throughout the process. It simply is a matter of efficiency. It helps things happen more rapidly, and it also helps deliver a higher quality product, because often the schedule-based release planning that happens, if you've implemented a feature and you started your testing only to find that it's got serious flow flaws, it may be too late to get a designer involved and completely rethink it. You may push out the door, push a product out the door that really isn't ready yet because you didn't have the resources or the time to get a good quality design as the requirements change during development. Development organizations have to have a reasonable expectations of quality. So because we're doing quicker releases, because we're implementing quick features and just getting them out there to see what happens, we have to decide, does the application have to be perfect, or what level of capability are we willing to expose our customers to, assuming that we can quickly fix issues and get a new version out there and maybe not affect that many users. We're also seeing that testing pretty much never ends. With the continuous delivery that we talked about in the previous slide and the testing automation and the device clouds, we're in a situation where you have a situation where development is constantly turning out new features, the testers are constantly updating the tests, and tests are basically constantly running. And so you have to have an environment that can handle that level of automation, because otherwise you'll get stuck at testing and not be able to release applications as quickly as you want to. And then last, this is MVP, minimal viable product. The idea is that you want to get something out there, get it operational, solve some problem for your employees or for your customers, and then do continuous enhancement over time to make the app what you ultimately want it to be. So the days of having a complete application delivered in 1.0 no longer exist. You're going to deliver a tiny bit of functionality in 1.0 and then quickly enhance it over time. Next slide, please. So then the results of this mobile push is that when you're looking to build applications, support for cross-platform is critical. So there's very few organizations today, I mean there are some, but there's very few in my mind, that are doing nothing but a single platform. You'll find at least 2 platforms in this space, and so you have to be able to accommodate them efficiently. We're finding organizations re-architecting the back end to provide those mobile-friendly services I mentioned earlier, and rethink how they deliver their data in such a way that they can accommodate multiple channels, including mobile, and then also recognize that going forward, we're going to have more applications disappearing and being replaced by voice interfaces and things like that. Visual tools are really important. I've worked for several development organizations, and while I was at one of them, I spent a lot of time with customers, and the biggest question we got was, what tools are you going to be able to provide me to allow me to more efficiently and effectively build mobile applications? So each of the target mobile device platforms have their own SDKs, and they've got visual tools available to help you design those apps. But if you remember the first bullet point on this page, that cross-platform support is critical, we're finding ultimately that organizations desperately need some sort of visual tool that allows them to deal with that cross-platform issue. And the next most interesting thing for me is that we're seeing more and more focus on delivering tools that enable what we're calling a business analyst to act as a developer. And if you think about this, well, we'll talk about it in a minute, but basically the market is driving through this cross-platform initiative and the importance of visual tool. We're driving to a place where the developers still need to be involved, because there's developer knowledge that the business analyst simply is not going to have, but a fair portion of the application capabilities can be easily defined by the business person that knows it best. And the other thing that's interesting, and I've covered this in some of my writings, several of my reports, is that we're seeing new flavors of hybrid apps. So hybrid traditionally has always been using web application technologies in a native app. But now we're seeing new flavors of this that are giving developers a completely new set of tools and giving enterprise developers some capabilities to leverage certain skills more effectively across a wider range of applications. Next slide, please. So we have a question here, a survey question. So if you don't mind, Stephen, pushing that. The question is trying to understand a bit about what platform you support. So are you using Android, iOS? Are you using Windows? Or maybe some other platform? So I'm going to sing for a moment while you guys answer these questions. Wow, I'm getting some good results. So far, 7% other, 6% other. What do you think, guys? Let it go a little bit longer, or? All right, Stephen, it looks like the numbers have solidified. So would you mind tossing up the poll results? Can we do that, or should I just talk about it?
Yeah, so go ahead and talk about it, John. Yeah.
Okay, so the results we got, 81% of the people on the call are doing Android development, 84% are doing iOS, and surprisingly, 35% are looking at Windows Phone. So this is something that we're seeing probably more in the enterprise than we are on consumer apps, and then 8% for other. So 71% of you voted, and some pretty good numbers. So thank you very much. Next slide, please. All right, so I mentioned earlier this whole concept of building mobile-friendly services. And if you think about a world where the IT organization has spent a fair amount of time thinking about the enterprise data that has to be exposed to the outside world, and that can either be employees or consumers. So they thought carefully about that, and they started working on this, making sure that they've efficiently delivered this data that applications can use. And couple that with a cross-platform development tool with some sort of visual designer, basically you get to an environment where anybody can build a mobile app. Now, like I said earlier, developers still need to be involved because there are things about the way mobile apps work that really have to be taken into combination. But effectively, with these two pieces and the appropriate tools, that you get to a point where anybody can create and maintain mobile apps. And the reason why I've underlined and maintain is because one of the problems we're seeing development organizations face is allocating resources to create an application, but then because of the constant updates, both because the business requirements have changed and new features are being added, we're tying up development teams and they're not available to go work on other ones. So the simplification of tools allows you then to more efficiently maintain mobile applications once you get them out there. Next slide, please. So then the last piece of this is, I mentioned earlier that there was this whole concept of new flavors of hybrid. And we're seeing some new entrants in the space that we're calling JavaScript-driven native. Basically, the ability to craft a native mobile application using JavaScript, right? So the traditional hybrid before was HTML, CSS, and JavaScript within a native container. But now we're seeing more JavaScript where we have an entire application UI and business logic driven by JavaScript. And basically what this does is it allows you to leverage your existing web developers to build mobile applications, build native mobile applications, which is something they really couldn't do very well before. It's inherently cross-platform. There's always some issues dealing with platform inconsistencies, but the goal of these technologies is always around the ability to build one app and make available across multiple platforms. And like I said, you get native user interfaces and native app delivery. So at the end of the day, the users can't really tell that the application they're executing was not written with native technologies. So that's it for my slides. Brandon, I think you're next.
Great, thanks, John. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to spend some time chatting with us. And thanks again, John, for your thoughts on mobility. My name is Brandon Satcham. I'm the General Manager of Progress Developer Platforms and Tools, which includes the Telerik Platform. Really happy to add on to John's thoughts. We have, we really like where Forrester is thinking in terms of where enterprise mobility is going in 2016 and beyond. A lot of our direction, we think, really mirrors a lot of what Forrester and other analyst folks are saying. So I wanted to share a little bit about that today and our thoughts around how we want to help you address many of those mobility challenges. But first, let's share a little bit about Progress and Telerik for those that are relatively new to the company. So if you're familiar with Telerik from our UI tools history, if you've been a long-time Telerik customer, you're likely aware that Telerik was acquired just a little over a year ago in December of 2014 by Progress Software. Progress Software is a long-time company that has really a lot of different products in their portfolio, from the server space to data connectivity, et cetera. And so it made sense for us to join forces in many ways. Where Telerik and Progress stand today is 28 offices around the world with almost 1,800 employees, 2,000 partners, 140,000 ISVs, 400,000 customers, and most importantly, and near and dear to my heart, 1.7 million developers that we have reached. And so we've reached a lot of developers and a lot of customers around the globe. And so we've heard many of your concerns and many of your challenges as you attempted to face mobility. So on the next slide, we really think that 2016 in many ways is the year of enterprise mobility. And for many companies, hopefully for many of you, this is the first time where I think we'll really start to see some large success, start to see that flywheel of success for companies that are looking to plant their flag in mobility, to start to execute on their mobility strategy. And a lot of that relies on this concept, this idea of digital transformation. And when we talk about digital transformation, and it's a term that many of you have heard before, it's a term that many of you are aware of, I look at it in terms of mobility, because honestly, in essence, digital transformation is about fundamentally changing your business and embracing changes to people, processes, and systems that these digital trends bring along for the ride. Mobility is a big part of that. We'll go much, much further in the space of mobility as we expand our definition of mobility with things and devices in the future. But today, for many of us in the enterprise, our challenge for mobility is about these devices in our hands and in our pockets. And we recognize that many organizations are struggling, or not necessarily struggling, but find that it's critical that they are successful with this idea of digital transformation in the next couple of years. The statistic is from an MIT Sloan Management report from last year, which observed that 78% of customers surveyed believe that digital transformation is critical to their organizations in the next couple of years. Now, our own research backs this up as we reached out to many of our developers, and we had over 3,000 developers last year tell us that mobility is a big tip of the spear for them in digital transformation. And so there's a recognition that mobility helps you improve operational efficiency, create revenue, increase employee productivity, and provide superior customer service and customer engagement. So we recognize that it's a huge problem. The challenge, of course, is that that the complexities of yesterday don't match the complexities of today. Digital trends have changed a lot about business in the last 20 years. And the problems of the early 90s and the 2000s, like what was the appropriate screen resolution for your browser-based application, are wiped away by much more connected and complex environment. And to be fair, it's not just about the complexity of the scale of devices that you need to be able to support, but the user experience. And so on the next slide, I wanted to share a little bit of the perspective on how digitization has changed. And so in the early days, when we looked at building a digital business, it was really all about taking those paper processes of the past and those legacy applications of the past and really bringing them into the desktop and making sure that our workforce was successful with back office systems and applications. And mobility brought us into this world of proliferation with BYOD policies and this desire of taking those same workflows, those same ideas on your desktop applications and extending those to the mobile device so that you can interact with the business and add value to the business, really, no matter where you are. But one of the other things that the world of BYOD and sort of the leveling up of experiences that we've gotten from our mobile devices is that expectation of a high-quality experience has extended into the apps that we're building in enterprises as well. As our employees, as our customers are bringing their own devices to us to meet their needs, they're bringing the same expectation for a high-quality experience. And that becomes a huge differentiator. So the ability of your developers to innovate and create great experiences, not just the applications, really is a key differentiator. And your developers need to be able to build to this future, because applications fundamentally now are all about the experiences that they provide. And many of you already know that mobility is important to your enterprises. So in the next slide, we recognize that many of your enterprises, you need more apps, you need better apps, and you need to deliver them quickly. It's very common, as we've talked to a lot of customers, to see that many of our legacy or many of our existing systems, when we talk about taking those mobile, it's not a one-to-one mapping between the device, between what we're actually, what you're doing in the mainframe or what you're doing on the desktop or in the desktop web versus what you need to do in the mobile device. In many cases, that one existing application needs to represent 5 to 10 or more mobile applications. And so your backlog gets even larger in terms of thinking about what you need to mobilize. The IDG Connects predicts that 50% of mobile enterprise apps will have to be rewritten by 2017, and we expect that a lot of that is it's not about poor tool choices on the place of in the part of enterprises. We really think the bigger aspect of that is just how fast mobile moves, period. We've long left the days, I think, at this point where you can build a single application that lives for 5 or 10 years or more. When you're talking about mobility, there's an expectation that your apps are keeping pace as those devices improve and mature as well, which does add to the challenge. And then finally, timely delivery of the largest apps is a huge challenge for many enterprises. And so we recognize on the next slide that there's a lot of challenge to creating mobile experiences. I think many of us, myself included, have those times where we wish for the simpler days of the browser-based web or the desktop web or the desktop systems that we built 15 and 20 years ago. But the fact of the matter is that this is an opportunity. With every challenge comes great opportunity. But we recognize that going mobile means we have a larger backlog of apps that we need. Our legacy systems haven't kept pace. It's not just a simple matter of opening a port to an Oracle system or to an on-premises database and then all of a sudden mobilizing that data. There are other considerations that have to be brought to bear. We have to support multiple platforms. I've mentioned BYOD a couple of times already, but those policies increase our security challenges because now it's not a corporate-owned asset that we're servicing the app or the experience to, but in many cases an asset that is owned by the customer, the consumer, and IT doesn't have complete control over how those devices are locked down and secured. So that does increase our challenges in delivering mobile apps. And then, of course, our existing IT skills and tools don't match the need. There are plenty of organizations out there that have great Java teams, and those teams, there is still an on-ramp to learn Android's flavor of Java and all the requisite SDKs and APIs. And even less so are there teams out there that we're spinning up brand new teams to learn Objective-C solely for the purpose of building mobile apps. Many enterprises that adopted the web 10 and 15 years ago have web skills, HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and web frameworks and backends as their primary expertise, and there's a desire to be able to reuse that. So it was with this goal in mind that we created the Telerik Platform just over 2 years ago. So with the Telerik Platform, our goal is to manage much of the complexity of cross-platform mobile app development, things from SDK management to debugging and deployment, so that you can actually focus on the apps themselves, because there are very few developers that want to mess with all of the intricacies of just getting ready to start doing mobile app development. And we want to give you something that you can use to start as quickly as possible. So on the next slide, in just over 2 years, we've actually seen a great deal of adoption of the Telerik Platform with over 160,000 users, 10,000 customers, and 35,000 apps that have been built. One of my favorite stats this year as well is we've also had over 667 million API calls to Telerik Backend Services, our mobile backend as a service product. And we've been fortunate to help many of our customers actually start their journey to mobility during that time as well. And so today, what I want to do, I wanted to build on John's presentation with a few thoughts of how the Telerik Platform can help you meet the mobility challenge in 2016. So on the next slide, please, Ruslan, there are 3 things really I wanted to talk about. One is to start faster with visual tools. 2 is to reach farther with data connectivity. And then finally, to embrace the rise of JavaScript native, or as John said as well, JavaScript-driven native. So let's start with the idea of starting with visual tools. And inside of the Telerik platform, one of the products or modules that we have is what we call platform views. And the idea of platform views is to help developers and non-developers alike quickly create mobile screens and to connect those screens to data. When we first started talking about this tool a couple of years ago, the idea was to bring a lot of the spirit of quick application scaffolding in the Ruby world and what was becoming increasingly popular in the ASP.NET MVC world as well, is to take that idea to mobility, that you had a data source, you had entities you wanted to connect to, and you had CRUD views and screens that you wanted to be able to create. And we wanted to make that as simple as possible because, frankly, that's not the most interesting or the most challenging part of application development. So we wanted to supercharge that part of the process so that you could get a long way towards the core functionality of your app as you're then layering on, and really focus and spend your time on the other parts of mobility that are building the mobile app that are unique to the app itself. And so in the box in platform views, we have template-based screens, the idea of simple data connectivity, which I'll show a bit about in a moment. It is code generation, but one of the things we like to say is it's code generation that won't frighten your developers. This is code generation that we like to say the templates, the projects that are created are the kind of app projects that our own development teams at Progress and Telerik would be happy to start their apps in as well. And then finally, view extensibility, which is a new feature that we added late last year. So if we can go to the next slide, Ruslan, there's a couple of builds here. Now, but the idea with extensibility is that it gives you the ability to create shareable screens for all your apps. It's one thing to be able to build an app quickly from templates, but for many of you that are, again, mobilizing a giant backlog of apps, you're going to have a common set of screens or a common set of views, probably across multiple apps or maybe even all of your apps. Authentication is a really good example. And with authentication, chances are most of the time you're tying to a single authentication store. So what shareable screens allow you to do is to create a new template or to duplicate an existing template. Once you've done that, if you can do the next couple of builds, Ruslan, you can take an existing template, extend that out, give it its own name, of course, and then the next build, you can do the customization that is unique to your own environment. So tying into ADFS or another authentication store. And then once you've done that on the final build, you have an experience or you have a shareable template that is very easy for you to leverage across all of your applications. If we can just do the final build, please, Ruslan. And it's very simple. So that shareable screen or that template view, you can then use. All of your developers and development teams and even non-developers can drag those extended views into all of the apps and saving yourself even more time. So the next topic I want to talk about is data connectivity, specifically reaching farther with data connectivity so that you can actually get the app to the data that matters to your app. So on the next slide, data is a lifeblood for your apps, right? We recognize that many of you are not creating new data for your apps. In many cases, there may be some pockets of data in the applications that you may want to use a cloud-based data source like Telerik Backend Services, but in many cases you're connecting to existing data. You need to be able to connect to that data securely, you need it to be offline, and it should be really tailored for mobile. In addition, you also need the ability to manage access to the app, to engage users via push, via email, and more. And inside the Telerik platform and our data and app service, we provide all these things and more. But I wanted to drill in really quickly on the next slide and the next few builds to talk about how that data connectivity to existing data is really, really important. So we have inside the box in the Telerik platform this feature called Data Connectors, which gives you the ability to connect to over 20 data sources and really to create a secure connection to that data source, whether it be in the cloud or on premises. Once you've set up that connection, you can specify in the next build an actual data source or a content type based on that data connector. So at this point, what you're doing is you're creating a mobile-friendly content type. So if you have a customer's record or a customer's table, excuse me, you don't want all 30 or 40 fields from that record to come over. You don't want all the data. And so what this screen allows you to do is to create that mobile-friendly data type that just has a handful of fields that are actually relevant to the app that you're creating. Once you have set that up in the next build, you have the ability to see and manage the data that's actually coming straight from that source, so you have an idea of sort of what you're getting. And then finally, again, back in our views part of the Telerik platform in the visual scaffolding in the final build, you have the ability to very quickly tie that data into your existing application, specify where in an existing view it needs to show up, and then you have that very mobile-friendly API ready to go. Now, I mentioned on the next slide that we have the ability to connect to really 20+ enterprise data and app connectors, either on-premises or in the cloud. And this is due to a partnership, of course, of us working with the Progress Data Direct team. And so we have the ability to support all the sources that Progress Data Direct can support as well, many of those listed here. The final thing that I wanted to spend a few moments talking about is embracing the rise of JavaScript native. This is one that's very interesting to me. John spent some time speaking about it as well. I think this is really a fascinating part of where mobile is going as the web takes over more and more in that space. And so I wanted to back up a bit and talk about the history of mobile web apps and Telerik's long-standing support for all those approaches. So on the next slide, if many of you or some of you are familiar with Telerik or have been in the past, you are aware that Kenda UI has been a big part of our story for the last 4.5 years. And when we created Kenda UI, it was designed to be a cross-platform, cross-browser JavaScript and CSS framework that allows you to build with the power of HTML5 to target multiple browsers and to do that for desktop apps, for responsive web apps, and for mobile web apps as well. And that is still a viable approach if you're building for mobile and you don't need access to native device APIs and you don't need store distribution. But when we launched the Telerik platform 2 years ago, we also added the out-of-the-box ability to combine Kenda UI with Apache Cordova for building hybrid apps. So you still have the power of the full web stack in JavaScript and CSS, access to native APIs not only through Apache Cordova plugins, but also the plugins that we offer through the Telerik Verified Plugins Marketplace. And finally, to do that all on top of an open source platform framework with a very active community. But really, our goal for the Telerik platform has always been to give you the ability to build with any approach based on the needs of the app you're building, not based on the limitations of the product that you've bought in with. And so it's important to us to be able to give you the ability based on the need of your app to support web, hybrid, or native. And so last year we introduced Telerik NativeScript. NativeScript is a fully open source framework and runtime. Again, gives you the ability to target web technologies in JavaScript and CSS to build cross-platform applications. So in the next couple of slides, let's actually take a look at how NativeScript works. And it's really important to mention here that NativeScript runs inside of JavaScript core on iOS and V8 on Android, and it provides runtime access to native APIs. So NativeScript is not a compilation step. When you're relying on NativeScript, you're actually writing JavaScript code directly against iOS and Android APIs and getting a fully native app out the other end. So you'll see in the example here at the bottom, go back to the other slide of this one, at the bottom here for iOS, there is some JavaScript code that looks a lot like iOS code and looks a lot like Android code when it comes to working with file paths. And so you have the ability with NativeScript to actually access those APIs in JavaScript syntax, and then the NativeScript runtime basically handles the marshaling of those calls into the native API access. But we've added another layer of value on top of that because, again, many of us are looking to build cross-platform apps, not specifically for one platform. And what we don't need is to adopt a framework that requires us to put a whole lot of if-def statements all over the place in order to build a quote-unquote cross-platform app. So we have on top of NativeScript, on top of the NativeScript runtime, NativeScript modules, a countless number of NativeScript modules, and more really being added all the time, both by Telerik and the community, that give you the ability to access a single API that is then brokered by NativeScript at runtime to the right OS. And so in this case here, working with the file system is 2 lines of code, simply working with the file system module, requiring the file system module, and then calling the fs.file method. And then at runtime, your application then determines if it's running on iOS or Android, and then makes the right calls into the appropriate API. This is a really important piece of the story. In addition to that cross-platform JavaScript access, we also give you the ability to use CSS for cross-platform styling. This is a really important piece of the story as well, because many developers, especially web developers, we've been used to and trained in this idea of separating our layout from styling. And in mobile, that's no different. Mobile hasn't always grown up with that same sort of mindset. So it's nice, we feel like, for developers to be able to also embrace a language that they're familiar with, a styling language, an idea that they're familiar with, in order to be able to build cross-platform apps as well. And so that's an important piece of the story. And then finally, in NativeScript, we provide a very component-like XML syntax for laying out applications. We really like the syntax that we've come up with NativeScript, and as we're observing a lot what's happening in the web with the rise of web components, we see the web is actually moving in this way as well, just having a very terse but very descriptive syntax for describing the layout of your applications. And as I said before on the next slide, the important thing at the end of the day is that the end result you get is a fully native app that's running JavaScript and delivering a fully native experience. Again, this is no compilation here. This is actually executing a native iOS app at runtime. The code is written in JavaScript, the styling is written in CSS and XML to describe the actual layout of the application. And you get native performance, native UI out the other side. Now, and then on the next slide, I mentioned before that when we started this idea, this journey with NativeScript, the important thing to us was not that we brought JavaScript to mobile, but that we bring the web itself to mobile. So NativeScript started is by being very standards-based. It was born with the web developer in mind. But taking that even further, we're also building NativeScript in partnership with the Angular team. And Angular 2 and NativeScript will be very, very tightly integrated. And even today, you can use NativeScript and Angular 2 together. We also have full support for TypeScript, which we recognize really addresses a lot of the concerns that many traditional developers coming from Java and C# and other places really have when they look at JavaScript, the language. And TypeScript is a really bold but important move in that direction to ease the comfort of many developers into the JavaScript space. And this is really important because this combination really gives you the ability to bring many of the web technologies and frameworks that you're used to, not just bringing JavaScript into the mobile app itself, but bringing the frameworks and the ideas and the technologies and concepts that are really important to you. And then finally, beyond the NativeScript framework itself, Telerik also offers UI for NativeScript. So the NativeScript framework itself is open source. You can build with NativeScript inside of the Telerik platform with a platform subscription. And we also have in beta now Telerik UI for NativeScript. And this gives you the ability, similar with other Telerik UI controls like Kenda UI and so on, gives you the best way to get professional cross-platform UI like charts and graphs and complex widgets. I mean, again, that's something that's in beta now. You can go, if you're looking at NativeScript, download that for free and check it out. And we're actually expecting to have the first official release of that this month. So we really think that, again, 2016 is going to be a big year for enterprise mobility. So on the next slide, we really hope that if you not yet consider the Telerik platform as your partner on this journey, that we really hope that you give it a look. And I want to share a few examples of customers that have bet on the Telerik platform for mobility and have had success. One of those is Paylocity. And Paylocity has been a long-time Telerik customer, and they've worked with Kenda UI and worked with Telerik App Builder on the Telerik platform to build their apps sort of internally facing using the Telerik platform. Another example is Kaizen Technologies, which is a Microsoft Partner of the Year. They've been around for about 20 years, and Mike Branstein is one of our good customers and partners and advisors there. Has been using the Telerik platform for a couple of years. They've been an early adopter of NativeScript as well, and they've been really happy with the results that they've gotten as it helps them really get feature-rich cross-platform mobile apps and get those done quickly. And again, I love Mike's quote here because this is really why the Telerik platform exists, is to help you and your organizations deliver business value, not get hung up on all the intricacies of adopting mobility in the first place. So that was my section of the spiel as well. Again, thank you all for taking some time. We're going to switch over to some time of Q&A, and I know Ruslan's been sort of monitoring the questions as they've come in. If anybody else has questions, if you have more burning questions you want to ask, please enter those in the questions panel, and we'll spend the next 14 minutes or so going through some of those. So what do you got for us, Ruslan?
Great. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you, John. I appreciate your time. I do have some great questions here. So we were on the topic of NativeScript, and one of the questions is how scalable and optimized is NativeScript compared to Swift native apps?
That's a great question. So our goal has always been with NativeScript in this, the value of the product is it gets you as close to the metal as possible. So we do a ton of optimization tests. We publish many of those, and we'll continue to publish those on our blog. So if you go to nativescript.org, you can get some information about what sort of benchmarks we've actually run against the various mobile OSs. But as the product has matured, there's a really top-tier performance to where your customers won't even really notice. Again, as John said before, the rise of these JavaScript native-driven apps is that you're delivering a fully native experience that doesn't have that uncanny valley feeling that sometimes can happen with hybrid applications.
Great. Thank you, Brendan. I have a question for, I think this will be better for John. John, I have a question asking, you talked a little bit about some of the best practices to enable and accelerate enterprise mobility. One of the questions is how do we do that while also keeping the costs down?
Well, honestly, the easiest way to do that is to do it in small steps, right? So put together a team that's starting to figure out the long-term strategy for making this transition, and then just break up the smaller pieces and then validate as you go over time. The biggest thing that a lot of organizations do with these type of technology transitions is they make certain assumptions about the cost benefits or the overall cost of it, and they use that to justify acquisition of funds to do whatever it is they want to do, but they never go back and assess and measure the actual results so that they can use that information to help make arguments for future purchases and things like that. So like I said, just break up the smaller parts, but just make sure you go back and validate the cost savings so that you can understand the effectiveness of your program and constantly adjust what you're doing.
Great. Thank you, John. I think, Brendan, you talked a little bit about the three approaches that are available as part of the platform, the web development approach, the hybrid, and the native approach. Could you share with us a little bit about when is the best time to use those approaches when developing mobile apps?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So again, as I mentioned before, it's really important to us that the choice of that approach is based on several factors that are going to be unique to you and your organization. So one of those factors is going to be the experience that you've got with any of those, with the web technologies. Are you a full-stack web shop where you feel like you want to maximize your use of JavaScript, CSS, and HTML as much as possible? Then obviously that plays into a choice of either web or hybrid in many cases. Add on to that, if you're choosing, if App Store distribution or internal distribution via an MDM or MAM provider is important to you as well, that may actually take you more towards hybrid. And what may take you all the way to native is if the user experience of the application is absolutely essential for app success. We can argue, and many stakeholders would argue, well, absolutely, it's got to be the best UX possible. But when you're evaluating a giant backlog of applications, you've got to make a choice between those applications that are maybe customer-facing or need to face a certain part of the organization where app performance just needs to be absolutely top drawer, versus those line of business systems and applications that it may be okay to ship those via hybrid because you can still get great performance out of a hybrid application even if you're not getting fully native UI, fully native animation. So again, there are a few factors that are sort of unique to each of those approaches that you want to take into consideration. But at the end of the day, it comes down to who your app is for, what it's trying to accomplish, and a lot of the skills that you've got in-house.
I totally agree with that, Brendan.
Cool.
Just in case that matters, sorry.
Yeah.
And just a follow-up question, an interesting question from one of the customers is, does the introduction of NativeScript mean that we will discontinue Ken the UI?
No, not at all. Absolutely not. Ken the UI really has had most of its success in helping desktop, responsive web, and mobile web developers deliver cross-browser apps quickly, and that is still a very important piece of the story. The world is going more and more mobile, but the fact of the matter is that there are still a ton of desktop web apps out there. There are still a ton of responsive web apps out there, and we actually only expect Kendo UI to grow and to become more and more important as the web and the desktop and mobile web become sort of a companion to a native mobility story as well. So we do think Kendo UI will continue to be important. We will, as a company, continue to invest in it even as we invest in NativeScript.
Great, thanks, Brendan. John, I think this question would be more appropriate for you. You talked a little bit about the business analyst and the developer roles in the organization. I have a question saying, what are some of the overlaps of these roles? What are some of the differences in these roles in the organization? Should we be looking for business analysts, or should we be looking for developers to build mobile apps? Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, and actually I didn't explain this as well as I probably should have during my part of the session. So my point behind that was that the business analyst is somebody who's associated with the business. So he's the dedicated person who's been assigned to, for example, work with development on implementing the mobile app. So the idea is that the business analyst understands the business problem, they understand the customers, they may understand a bit about the back-end systems that house whatever data that you're talking to, and in the traditional mobile development project, that business analyst works with development to answer any questions about the requirements, validate any flows within the application, validate the screens and things like that. And they're really two completely separate roles with completely separate responsibilities. So the business analyst is some person from the business that just has knowledge, right? Knowledge that pretty much nobody else is going to have. And on the mobile development side, the mobile developer is going to be specifically skilled in the target platforms, in mobile development, and then in whatever tools they use. And the reason why I'm saying that the developer has to be experienced with the target platforms is there's special ways things work on different platforms. So things work differently in iOS versus on Android, for example. And unless that business analyst is aware of both, he may end up building, and I apologize for saying she may end up building an application that doesn't work the way it should on iOS or Android. So that's why that's that partnership between the two. So my point to follow up all of this is that with the tools and technologies that dramatically simplify this, the business analyst simply becomes more capable of building mobile apps simply because the tools enable him to do that. I hope that long answer got you what you were looking for there.
Yep, it definitely did. Thank you.
That's great. Yeah.
Brandon, does Telerik Platform support offline apps, and could you talk a little bit about some of the use cases for offline apps?
Yeah, absolutely it does. And I know I glossed over this a bit as I talked about data and application services, but inside of the SDK that we ship for our data services, our Telerik Backend Services module, we do have offline support baked in. And so you have the ability inside of your app, inside of your project, to specify the data sources that you're configuring can be offline enabled by default, and you can do that inside of the UI. So as your analysts or developers are working inside of the views part of the Telerik platform, they have the ability to specify that an app, that the data source needs to be available offline. And then we also have the ability to encrypt that data offline, so we have offline security baked into the SDK, as well as the ability to specify how you want to handle conflict resolution if there are issues with data as it's getting synced back to the cloud or to your on-premises system, how those conflicts will be managed. And a lot of the use cases that we see around that is, I mean, there are many use cases. Again, mobility unshackles many of our employees and many of our partners and customers from their desks for certain critical tasks. And so there are many cases like a field sales application, field asset management, really a lot of cases where employees are on the go that they need the ability to disconnect even if it's briefly, right? You don't want a network issue or if somebody's driving in the middle of nowhere and they switch over a cell tower. Hopefully they're not driving and using their mobile app, but let's say they're just in a weird dead zone. But they have the ability to actually still continue to function, to work, know that data is not lost, and it'll actually be pushed for them on the back end so that they can continue to be productive and not be hampered by edge case limitations in their devices.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brandon. I have quite a few questions asking if the slides and the recording will be available, and the answer is yes, we will make the recording available to everyone who is registered for the webinar. And then one last question, Brendan, is I have a few people asking about Windows Phone support for NativeScript. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously when it comes to really fulfilling the cross-platform story, we recognize that many of our customers, many enterprises are adopting Windows Phone or Windows Universal, or as Microsoft sort of stabilizes the naming of this, we'll know what we can pin down. But that is an important piece of the story. We have that planned for the second half of this year. And part of the reason why we decided to wait, just in full transparency, is because we wanted to make sure that for those customers that are adopting iOS and Android for their applications have the best possible iOS and Android experience with NativeScript. And when we bring on a third platform, we want to make sure that you're not making trade-offs on your Windows Phone applications, that you have the same experience, the same level of support as you're building for iOS, Android, and Windows. So we're working on that. It's planned for the second half this year in terms of full support. I do have some good news, however, for those of you that are interested in sort of seeing what we're thinking there. On the open source project side, we are actually releasing inside of the NativeScript organization. With our next release, we'll actually open source our initial implementation of the Windows bridge, of the Windows runtime, so that you can start to see what we're doing and where some of the existing pieces that we want to work on before we fully ship it and support it. So great question.
Thank you, Brendan. Obviously, we have a lot of questions that we can't answer all of them today, but we will follow up with the customers with the content of this webinar, and feel free to reach out to us for any further questions. Thank you, John. Thank you, Brendan, for your time. Thank you all for attending this webinar, and take care.
Thanks,
bye-bye.